All right, Luke, we've been saying that we do the IPO episode for a while now, but following the footsteps of our industry, we've been delayed. Only with us, it was for a good reason, to be fair, because in the meantime, we've had some great guests on. John Goodman, hey, people listening, go listen to that episode. Everyone loved it, especially on LinkedIn. But no special guest today. Besides, I have a good CEO to talk to later on. I think you do have to go here, but we're doing the topic of IPOs specifically in the mining industry. And I'll kind of go ahead and give you the conclusion as is, so you can skip to my interview with Dustin Perry, one of the, by the way, great young geos in the space, patient too, because the second time he's talking to me. And before that, and after topic of IPO, we'll do the movers because there's some spiciness again going on. There's a one of the stocks has gone up 5x, I think that is, and then there's a new discovery potentially that Luke's taken a position in. So we'll talk about that. But mining IPOs, the conclusion, they suck. That's it. That's the short of it. That's the short of what is about to be about a half an hour or so of a conversation. The medium long of it will be that there is the rare opportunity where they don't suck, but you should still be careful because there are very few. There are almost none companies actually that after the initial 10 years of on the back of an IPO have kept their name, did no rollback, and have delivered on their business plan and have kept the same business plan. Because almost none. Okay, so typically that means that you're looking to lose anywhere between half to 3/4 of your money if you're very lucky and smart, or almost all of your money if you're kind of like me. Now, why we're bringing this up is because issuers have noticed that obviously when you can already lose plenty of money by just going long existing stuff in the market. And so when even good stuff, honest people with good projects can, and most of the times do lose you money, why do you need another vehicle to lose more money? I mean, if you listen to my wife, which nobody should ever do, but if you do, she'd tell you that it's kind of a hobby. So point being, issuers realize that there's little to no demand for IPOs, and they stopped doing this. The first half of this year has seen a historically low number of TSXV IPOs, and again, that's TSXV as a whole, so typically predominantly mining, but not only mining, just a small caveat. But what does all that mean? Is it making a statement about a market bottom? What's an IPO to begin with? Should I even care about what it is? Why do they mostly seem to lose you money? How do I not lose my money in an IPO? And how do I notice the obvious red flags in advance so that I can complain about them on Twitter? Well, obviously, I have no idea how to answer those questions. And the only thing I do on Twitter is dad jokes. So this is where I finally shut up. And this is where you take it away, Luke.
Yeah, I do not agree with everything, but most of it. Let's just put it like this. uh, well, I think the main reason is why a lot of IPOs go wrong is because most IPOs start in a hot market, and buying stocks in the hot market typically means that you're buying at a high price and you will sell it at a lower price, as Rick Rule has a couple of very nice phrases for. Um, and if you right now, if you look at the IPOs, indeed, there's almost no IPO, and right now is the time probably to invest if you look back in a year or two from now. So I think the whole reason is when everybody wants to spend money and just gamble in these exploration stocks, that's when you get all that supply, and that's when all those companies get created in a very, very short period of time. And that's why in 2020 a lot of these IPOs went completely wrong. They listed for 50 cents, 80 cents, $1, and you will find them back right now for between 2 and 5 cents. A lot of them, with a couple of exceptions, I think.
Well, again, there's more questions to talk about here, but here I'm getting a good idea for a quick buck, if you will. What if you and I incorporated a venture? Each of us chips in $50,000, which gets us, let's say, 25 million shares each. So quick maths, 0.002 cents per share. We buy an asset somewhere on an Arctic island where no analyst is going to come and actually look at it. We shut up for a year, which will be the hardest part, I suppose. And then we go and do an RTO on our company, essentially listing it for, let's say, light $25 million. We cash out on half of that at what, $1 a share, I suppose. And then we're never to be seen again. How does that sound?
Well, in most cases, when an IPO is created, the private company is already 2 years old, or sometimes the CPC, so the capital pool company, or the shell, they are at least trading for 2 years, because then all the escrows are off, and indeed then the people can sell the stock if they want to. But typically the founders, or the people who are called the founders, or the people who are running the company, the face of the company, they cannot really sell. So sometimes they are not even people who are really making most of the money unless they are successful. It is the people creating those shells and staying below 10%. And of course, we are talking in a way right now as if everyone tries to scam you, which is not true, but there's enough of it to be careful for sure. I always assume that everyone below 10% will sell when they are at a 10x because that's very lucrative for sure. But of course, there's people who have a long-term vision and really stay with the company. I think you have to investigate these companies. So what is the private company? When was it started? You can typically see that in the Canadian database for private companies. If the private company was started a year ago, what often happens is that the private company makes a deal with somebody else. They get the option to buy a project for $1 million, have to pay $10,000 on day one, and then they sell that option to another company, to their private company. So first of all, they make a deal just on paper. They pay $10,000. Then they sell that deal to the company, and that company then goes public. So that's a way to really get a lot of shares in a very short period of time. And that doesn't even have to be a bad thing. Still, you have to investigate what did those people really do. Other companies have been exploring for 3, 4, 5 years, and feel like this is the right time to go public. We have created some value. Now is the time. We need more money. We're going to drill a lot, and raising that money is easier when we are listed, or the market is just offering enough to go public. So I think it's really important to look at why is the thing coming. How is it coming to the market? Why is it coming to the market? Is it coming through an RTO where where an existing shell is taken over, or is it going through an IPO process where they have to provide all the documents to the exchange? They will review it in the prospectus. Even in an RTO, they have to provide a lot of documents, but an RTO is gives a little bit more freedom. And then you have other ways. Sometimes a spin-off is a way to create a new company, and I see that spin-offs typically are a little bit better then, because most real companies have a reason to spin it off. Why would they spin it off if it has no value at all? So in most cases, they have a main asset, but the second asset is important enough to spin it off, and that's why sometimes it gives you an opportunity to buy that spinco, because people in the main co see it as a free share that they get, and they sell it early on. So there's typically a bit of selling volume in a spin out, which allows you to buy in cheap if you are new to the company and you like it, you like their business plan.
Okay, but here, how would you rate that? Because that's an interesting thing about how a company goes public. That also matters because there's escrows and whatnot. And so essentially, there's the four things you said, right? You have just have a new listing, just a proper listing, expensive though. Then you have the QT, so the qualifying transactions, right? So that's typically, well, we're talking about a shell here. You have the RTO, which, as far as I understand it, there's the most room for shenanigans. And then, oh no, so it's only three. Well, I suppose there's other kind of creative ways, but those are the three main ways the companies go public. How would you rank them from a perspective of this is where the least can go wrong?
I think in most IPOs, I mean, I have to be careful because people shouldn't take this completely. It can always be a bit of a difference. But IPO, typically, companies go through a process of 9 or 12 months to go through all the different steps with the exchange. I think in most cases, these companies have legitimate reasons to go public. They really want to start a company. They make all the documents and start a new company. They bring a company public. In the RTO space, I just think that it happens more often, and that's why be more careful. There are many shells. In Australia, you don't have that. And in Canada, you probably have 1,000 companies below $5 million. I don't know if the number is correct, but it's a big number of tiny companies. Some of them are 500,000, 800,000. And what they typically do is they roll back their share count. So it's a failed company. They have 50 million shares out. They roll it back, and then they have 5 million shares out. Then they print another 5 million shares, and the people who get those 5 million shares, who buy them, own 50% of the company. And sometimes they do another rollback, and they issue another number of shares. Sometimes there's depth. The people have, they have salaries for all their work that they do, and sometimes it's not a lot of work, but they still get a lot of money for it, and they settle those salaries in shares. So suddenly they issue another 5 million shares for salaries, and then they issue another 5 million shares. So at some point, there are companies who have 2 or 3 rollbacks, and 5 or 6 share issuances through debt settlements and financings. And suddenly the company is 95% owned by a few people. Let's just say between 5 and 10 people, maybe 15, because most of them will want to stay below 10% to not be a reporting insider. And those companies, these people think about how can we get value for our cheap stock. And sometimes it is just getting a cobalt company into a cobalt venture into it because cobalt is hot, or get a wheat company into it because wheat is hot, or gold right now. Let's make it a gold company. And typically you can see the signs that the company that they are buying, was quite easy to get. It was something on the shelf, a project that nobody else wanted, but they want it because there's a nice hole to be twinned, or there's enough promotional value behind the project to make a couple of nice slides and sell the project, to investors who think it's amazing, but a project that has no merit anymore. So I think in these RTOs, they happen so often that you have to be careful. Um, I still think that RTO is also a proper way because those shells can be very clean, as I just explained through those rollbacks. Sometimes cleaner than in IPO, because in IPO you have to give 150 or 250 people a share. They need a minimum number of shareholders. In some RTOs, they have been rolled back so many times that I believe there's only 100 people left, or 50 people left, or less, with a meaningful stake. So RTOs are tricky because people do more bad things with them, but not necessarily always. I have a case study in a minute which worked out really well for me, which was also an RTO.
This actually, before we go to the example, which I know is going to be good, but it might be a good point to talk about the different exchanges, because I know you actually have a preference, so much so that at times you could find a company that you might be interested in, but if it's, let's say, I think what you specifically listed on the LSE, so in London, you still wouldn't buy it. And but so in Canada, there's what, 4 or 5 exchanges. There's NEO, there's CSE, TSXV, the TSX, whatever else. What's the difference really? And is there a difference when we're talking about IPOs? And why do you care about where the company's listed?
Well, in 2020, there were so many companies trying to go public that companies decided to go to the NEO exchange, which was a new exchange. They were innovating, cheaper, quicker, maybe even better in some aspects. And that's why a couple of NEO companies were created back then. TSXV still has sort of the best image, even though any mining exchange has a bit of a funny image in the world, I think. But of the mining exchanges, TSXV is probably the best together with the ASX. And then the CSE has a little bit more of this trickier exchange because there's more companies, I think, on a percentage basis that are not real, or are very promotional, or promoting something that's not really valuable and trying to make it look like very valuable. So it's not that I wouldn't touch CSE listed stocks. I'm certainly following them, but I have a little preference for the TSXV because their requirements are a bit higher, but they're also more expensive than the CSE. I think Snowline started on the CSE, so it's not that real companies cannot start there. I mean, they have also success stories. Irving in Japan also is CSE listed, and there's a number of other ones that are good companies, but CSE has a little bit more of those scams. On the other hand, a couple of years ago, CSE released all those, and that's part of my story in a minute, released all the different people in the private placements. So any person buying even $5,000 worth of shares was disclosed in the document. So that in that way, I could track exactly how many shares were owned by what person. And some of those shells, even the Bridgemark scam, which I found quite early in 2016, I think, or 17, I found it because they had to release all those names. And at some point, I started counting up all those shares within 15 people. And I realized that those 15 people owned 95 or 98% of all the shares. They just did rollback after rollback, and debt settlement after debt settlement. And they just created themselves 98% of the shares. And they just, you can bring a share to any level if you own everything with your friends. The only difficulty, I think, and I never found out how they did it, is to then get liquidity in the stock and sell all your shares. I'm not trying to explain it for the purpose of doing it as well, because then I'm probably illegal, but I'm trying to just I think in a way the Bridgemark scam the method, the way they did it, is not that far away from how real companies do it. They also, want to create a story, preferably get a high share price, and do something with the share price, issue more shares, raise money. So it's in any case a funny business we are in. It is a story, it is a hope, it's a dream combined with science, and everybody, you want to make a nice story and you want to make people buy the thing. So I always think about, is the story good enough to attract people? Is the person good enough at selling to attract people? But now I'm going away from your question. So yeah, I think be more careful with RTOs, be more careful with CSE. And in both cases, they can also provide good companies, but they just have, I think, a higher number of tricky companies, as I would call them.
I'm kind of writing it down as you go, but basically a couple of questions to ask, really, and figure out if management's doing a good job. I have the first part was what percent, and I wrote that before actually. I wanted to ask you about it, but time is kind of pushing. So, what percentage of the IPO proceeds is going toward non-revenue generating activities? So that'd be marketing, executive salaries, and so on. I shouldn't say non-revenue generating activities, but more like activities that are not going to move the stock price or do non-value generating activities. I don't know why I'm saying revenue. Maybe I should have more coffee. Non-value generating activity says, and you can argue about marketing and stuff like that, adding value, but I mean like money going into the ground. So what percentage of the money is going to go into the ground? What percentage is going to go to G&A? That's going to be my first question. Second thing would be just looking at insider transactions, stock option grants, RSUs, and stuff like that before the IPO announcement. So kind of understanding the share registry there. Looking at sometimes there could be litigation. So auditors sometimes would have, if there's a litigation with an auditor, that can be a problem, but also drillers and whatnot, if there's been work done before that. You can then look at the valuation. I mean, how much of the valuation is realistic? Sometimes IPOs will be overpriced, so obviously that's part of it compared to other stocks that are not public, that are public. So compared non-public to the public one. Lockup agreements, they should be in place, but how many shares can be sold? What period? Who can sell them? Who holds them? As you said, so that was that's what I thought a good point. Yeah, just the regulatory part is part of it. Have there been? Yeah, that might be a bit too much, but have there been any executive or board member changes before you went public? Because if the company was active for 2 years and there have been too many changes, that could also be a red flag. Yeah, how much does the company, how much does the company rely? Well, how much does the stock price really rely on the hotness of the market, if you will? So if uranium is a mega bull market and you have a uranium IPO, how much of the stock price performance depends on the market alone? And this is kind of protecting yourself from the hot commodities thing that you said. Budgets, of course, you want to understand budgets, like how much money is it going to cost them to actually, you go to the first question, but how much money is it actually going to cost them to drill, find something, and how much time is that going to take? And I think that's, how many did I do, like 7 or something like that? But that's basically the main takeaways on IPOs for me. What am I forgetting? What should I add?
Yeah, I think most of them are correct, and I agree. I do also think that indeed, you mentioned it, the market. Why is this company going public right now? I think again, ideally they have been working on the project for a number of years, so it's already their baby. It's a real thing that they have been thinking about, working on. It's a real science project. Well, science projects are not always good, but like somebody really spent time on trying to figure something out. If it's something that's you could create in 6 months again, by just making a deal, putting it in, and start the complete thing, then already be careful, because it's a little bit of a story, a quick thing that anyone with connections could put together in a very short period of time. But then even the really good companies with the big names, you have to be careful. I was begging, well, begging is a big word, but I was asking Goldshore when they went public, like, can I get some shares at 60 cents? No, they was just fully allocated. Goldshore was going public in 2021, also through an RTO, and the people involved were Doug Ramshaw. He was in Great Bear. He's with Minera Elawas, really real guy. People want to be involved with his companies. Victor Cantore, Amex, just made the discovery. Good name. Sean Kunkun. Then you had Brandon McDonald. Then you had the founder of Goldcorp, David Garofalo, Greg Berry, Brian Slusarchuk, Leo Hathaway. This is from the Ross Beatty Club. Daniel Kunz, who is with Prime Mining, Pierre Lassonde, Adrian Rodwell. All these people were involved. And you think, wow, this thing is going to the moon. You get all these people together, and I want to be involved in this. 60 cent, no, there was nothing available anymore. This stock opened at 90 cents and has been one way direction down to 8 cents. There has never been over 90 cents again. It just went down like crazy. And only since half a year, since Brian Pace Braga sort of took over the complete thing, it started going up again. And I think there's nothing wrong with the plan. They bought a big project, a big gold project, but it was in a hot market when everybody wanted to be involved, including me. I didn't get shares, luckily. And even with all those names, it didn't work out. The stock went 90% down. So I think, indeed, most of these things come to you in a good market. If they come to you in a bad market, that's already a very good sign. But still, try to find out, is the person really involved? Is he really involved with the private company? Is this his life project, or is it just one of the 10 things he is putting some money in and he promotes? And I think that's the key thing. How much do they love their own company? How much are they into it, and how long are they working on it? And if those questions are answered with, it's their real thing, they also have the ability to raise capital, then it's certainly worth having a look. And
Right.
That's most important, I think.
That's a good point. I think the topic of IPO is interesting. It seems like a lot of people are using it as an argument of us hitting a bottom. Although I think I've seen 1,700 predictions of the last two bottoms. So it doesn't really always work too well. And I'm stealing that from Rick Rule, of course. Let's talk about the movers, though. We have two movers that you wanted to discuss more in depth this week. We have a couple of minutes before Dustin joins us, or at least me. But core nickel is up 350%. There's two investors getting in, giving it a big investment. Basically, I interviewed core nickel, and that's a CSE listed company, if I'm not mistaken. I interviewed them a couple of months ago. They didn't have too much interesting stuff to tell, but it seems like the ball is starting to roll. Why do you have it on here?
Well, this is normally what I really like to invest in. I missed it. One of my alert systems gave me it, but I didn't see it or didn't pay attention to it. I missed it. If somebody, with a $1 million fine, 1 million valuation, and you think it's real, it doesn't even have to be the best company in the world, but they have a nice land package, they have potential, and then two people join. One is the founder of Arizona Metals, or both are actually co-founders of Arizona Metals, but both of them have a real track record, and both of them put $200,000 into a financing. So that they are buying 40% of the company, or like 30% together, in one financing. Then something. Why are they putting in $200,000 in such a tiny company? That's typically enough. If good people put that amount of money in such a small company for the thing to run, I would have bought a bit of stock if I noticed it. I didn't, and the stock started running from 3.5 cents to 31 cents, the high of the day, 3 days later. So you almost have a 10-bagger in 3 days. It's not completely fair, because you could not have bought it at 3.5 cents. You could probably have bought it at, well, maybe only 7 cents, because the moment they released the names, initially they announced the financing, they didn't release names. There was a bit of a leak because the thing went up like crazy. And then at 8 cents, they released the names, and then the stock went to 31 cents. And right now it's trading at 20 cents. But these are opportunities, I think. Good share count. Then you watch a couple of interviews very quickly, and you see that there's somebody running the company these days that doesn't have a big name, but is real, has been working for Cameco for a long time. It is not a promoter. It's more like a real geo trying to find something, combined with a good land package, combined with two new backers for a $1 billion company, is just typically an easy bet. So that's the real reason I wanted to show core nickel. And again, this is a spin out of Alaska, Alaska, which is a real company. So they had a reason to spin it out, and probably it's important enough for people to invest in it. So this is an example maybe of a spin out where buying at the bottom is a good idea. But of course, well, it's easy to say right now for me. Let me say that for something that's not gone up yet. Kuliko, I think, is one that has been spun out of Karora, nickel that is trading at below cash levels and has this potential as well, I think.
Well, I disagree that you should watch a couple of interviews. I think you should only watch my interviews, of course. But yeah, Canalaska's been at it for a while, and yeah, I mean they definitely could have done better, to put it mildly. So I want to see what happens with this core nickel thing. It's again up a lot. It's almost $5 million market cap, but this is, yeah, I understand where you're coming from on the setup as it was before, but without these two people going in, was it really something to get excited about? That's kind of the question, I suppose. That it's hard to catch them that early on. You bought some stock this week though, and you're up on it already, I believe. What did you buy?
Well, I was a bit late in the day. There was I don't know, I shouldn't call it a discovery because it was, I think, a twin hole. Well, it depends how you define twin. But they released very high grade assays, 144 grams gold and 1,100 grams silver over 7 meters. Most of it, though, was in 2 meters. So I consider it a very high grade 2 meter vein or a shoot. And but this company was trading at 10 million not long ago. Even was halted for a while because they had a deal which didn't go through with New Range, a Canadian company. Mithril is a Australian company, and since that deal didn't happen because the financing couldn't be done by New Range, they couldn't get the money. The thing was halted for half a year. Then they found a new investor, Jupiter Gold and Silver, put in $4 million almost, and started drilling again. And they have an interesting project with high grade veins. So it's 17 meters of 5 grams. Right now, 144 grams over 7 meters. I think it's 2 meters. Then they had 80 grams, I think, over 8 meters a couple of years ago. The stock was worth 100 million a couple of years ago. But in Australia, they don't really appreciate, I think, Mexican projects, especially right now with Mexico being tricky. But also in general, I think they are more focused on their own Australian projects and African projects, and not so much the Mexican ones. So this company is going to the TSXV right now. The CEO had mentioned in the interview that they are working with Canadian groups and Canadian promoters, he called it, to do something. So maybe this outfit, Mithril, will be supported by some known group. And I have no idea what, but it could be an Inventa type or Medalist type, or maybe even a Justra type group which would support a company like this. Their story is, we are going to find another Mexican belt like they did 12 years ago with another company that they ran. The name escapes me right now, but these results are interesting, and the company is now trading at $30 million. I bought a bit of stock because they seem to hit good grades where they have drilled so far, and they have done a couple of interesting analysis. People who enjoy investing in these things, I would suggest not only to read the press release of the drill results this week, but also the one before that, where they did a LiDAR survey. It sounds boring, but that LiDAR survey has some really interesting revealings. They found many old mining pits and mining workings that they couldn't see anymore because of all the overburden. But through LiDAR, they found that this area has been mined in the 1800s, like in lots of different places over many kilometers. 100 pits, I think they have, and 80 different edits. And I mean, they found lots of different things through LiDAR, and I enjoyed reading that press release, and it sort of confirms the sort of bigger scale of this belt. So that's why I bought some stock. I didn't buy a very big position, but I bought some stock at 32 cents at the end of the day in Australia.
I've got literally nothing to add here. Although I could look into it and see where that goes, because it does indeed look interesting by the looks of it on surface. Anything else, or should I let Dustin in?
Yeah, let him in. I will join next time.
All right, Dustin, you and I sat down for a conversation about Kingfisher a while back, not too long ago. But since we'll be working together for the foreseeable future, we'll be doing more of those, hopefully in a more regular cadence over the next couple of months, I suppose, and hopefully starting soon too with some results. But today, I want to zoom in on the man behind the CEO, if that makes sense, the man behind the company, because this company really kind of comes from your head, if you will. So let's kick it off with kind of a high level overview. Maybe you can take me all the way back to when you were born in what I would guess is 1987.
85.
Close, very close.
Good. I'm not aging that bad, I guess.
Good. Well, so you're born in 80. So where were you born?
I was born in Vancouver. Grew up near Kits in Point Grey, near Kitsilano in Vancouver. So on the west side of Vancouver. Parents they met in Vancouver. My dad's a doctor. My mom's a nurse. My dad claims that they met where he needed to check her pulse for reference at the hospital while also checking the patients. But yeah, I don't come from a geology background or family, or mining family, but I actually come from a medical family. I think my dad's a fifth generation doctor or something like that.
Hmm.
And my sister became a nurse practitioner, so I kind of broke the chain. I'm the black sheep of the family.
So that's a good pickup line, by the way. If I weren't married for 10 years, I'd probably use it. But so hang on. So your dad's a doctor, and you decided to go and bang on rocks with a hammer. That was like you saw. How did that happen? Who were you in high school? Was there anything to kind of precede that? Like how did that even happen?
Well, I was incredibly competitive at high school.
Hmm.
I played provincial level sports. I played baseball for BC. I played rugby for BC, and then ended up actually playing under 19 Canada rugby. So I was, and like the baseball was even more intense. Actually, we played 6 games a week in high school. So did that, did track and field. Basically played every sport. I played basketball. I'm only 5'9", so I played basketball until I couldn't really keep up to my level of competitiveness. So I would say that fostered an attitude that you need kind of to go into this. You need to be really hungry and committed. Uh, but it did not foster the geology. What fostered that, I would say, was unknown to me until after a couple years of biology at university. It was I just spent a lot of time in the bush as a kid. So my dad and I would do a lot of like float planing into an area and go backpacking and backpack back to the vehicle, things like that. A lot of fly fishing in remote areas in BC. At age I think 19, we canoed across the full width of BC from Highway 37, where I'm now working, all the way to the Alaska Highway. I think that
Hmm.
was a 18-day trip or something like that. So a lot of like really adventurous things that once you stop, you kind of crave. And then,
Hmm.
getting into exploration when I did, it was a pretty quick acknowledgement of, oh yeah, this is where I want to be.
I made a mental note not to ever piss you off if you were playing baseball and rugby all throughout college, but I kind of already knew that. What but you're essentially one of the rare Vancouverites, if you will, because there's not a lot of people in Vancouver that are actually from Vancouver. I've been told. I don't know if that's the case. But it's also interesting that your family wasn't necessarily involved in mining. I think a lot of the people in Vancouver are kind of there for mining, right?
Yeah, it's a big mining center, but plenty of other people too. It's a
Yeah, sure.
decent sized city. It's not a huge city, but it's a couple million now. It was a lot smaller when I was a kid. It's very different. Like the neighborhood I grew up in on the west side of Vancouver. Now it's a very wealthy community that's fairly insular. Whereas as a kid, people would be playing, hockey in the street and whatnot. So it was quite different. It wasn't as wealthy of a place growing up as it is now.
Hmm.
It was
What
a
did
lot friendlier back then.
what did you do in high school? Like, did you have to work? What was your first ever job? Like selling ice cream or something small like that?
So first job I ever had was in grade 10. I was working at Safeway, a big grocery chain, stocking shelves. And I remember the negative memory from that is that they put me on night shift on a weekend during high school.
Nice.
And it was a couple of the other senior guys on staff were kind of treating me like I was a cellmate in jail. Not wait, don't let your mind go there, but I mean more like, yeah, I'll protect you, and that guy, like, don't let him boss you around. He'll try to like get you under his wing, and oh, I'll protect you. And it's like, all right, this is a little much, and I got out of that job pretty quickly because the sports started to take over, and
Hmm.
I didn't. It would have been very challenging to hold a job plus play say 6 baseball games a week.
Hmm.
Uh, it just wasn't possible until later on, like grade 12 basically, and then didn't did things like landscaping and and
Mm.
jobs like that, leading into the first real jobs I had, or like better paying jobs I had, were prior to switching, because I didn't start in geology. I started in biology. And
Mm.
this is funny. So I didn't know what I was going to do, which we can get onto when it kind of clicked. But I didn't know what I was going to do. I was very naive, and I just thought, oh, I'll go into medicine too. I found it interesting, and my dad sat on the UBC Med School board, and I naively thought, oh, well, he'll be able to get me in. Not the case, and regardless of that, I just didn't really enjoy, I guess, the vibe in the pre-med crowd. It was pretty cutthroat, and there wasn't really a team environment, which I was so used to from all these sports I played. So anyways, I did
Mm.
biology, a couple years of biology, and I actually tree planted for a couple of years, which was very hard work. Made more money doing that than I did my first probably 5 years as a geologist, because you're paid per tree you put in the ground. So if you've got hustle and you're in really good shape, you can really make a good, you can make $500 a day as a 19-year-old.
Mm.
Which back then, that might, what is that, like $10,000 now with inflation? But well, you can make good money doing that. So those were the initial jobs I had until I got an exploration job, which was the minute I switched to geology. The first summer I had was working in the bush.
So when you went to college, you actually started in biology. How many years of that did you do?
I did 2 years, and then over a summer, I got the one course I needed to get into geology, and then I entered geology in second year. So
Mm.
I guess I delayed myself by a couple of years, versus peers that went straight through the 4 years out of high school. But I probably wouldn't have ended up there if I didn't have a few, I guess, youthful failures along the way of figuring out my way.
That's interesting because that's also what I would typically ask you here is like, what would you have done differently in terms of studies? Like, if you could go back, would you skip the geology part? Was it useful? Would you switch it for, I don't know, finance? I mean, finance is, as a CEO, like it or not, it's going to be a big part of what you do. So would you do anything differently in terms of studies?
No, no, no. It all worked out. It all
Mm.
worked out the way it did. Had a lot of good experiences along the way. The funny thing is, my father could recognize that I was, I wouldn't say floundering, but I just didn't have a clear direction. And what he told me was, instead of wasting your time doing something you don't, without knowing what you want to do, go get a trade. Go get your electrical ticket, go get your carpentry ticket, go do something like that, so you'll have a fallback in the future. And I didn't take his advice. I do wish I did, because there was a few times, most of my career has been in a horrible market. So there's definitely a few times when early in my career, when work was uh, in shorter supply and pretty stressful at times. And if you had a high paying fallback option like that, would have been handy. And then
Mm.
I'd save some money on my house now when I got to call the technicians in. But no, everything worked out positively. Very happy where I'm at now, so I wouldn't really change anything.
Well, I did carpentry in high school. That's kind of how it goes here in Belgium. I always wanted to do finance, but my dad was pushed me in the direction because that's what my dad does. My dad does carpentry. But so my wife now gets pissed off because I stuff the house with everything I make when I'm nervous or whatever. I make stuff. And so it can be a blessing, but also a curse. What do you think that this is a question I ask most of the times when I talk to CEOs? Actually, they kind of have the corporate side of the story. They have an MBA or whatever it might be, finance degree, something along those lines. And I would ask them, hey, do you think you have to be a geo to be a good exploration CEO? So let's revert that question to you. Do you think you have to have a finance degree to be a CEO, or do you think you having the geology degree are better prepared to be, again, specifically that position of a CEO for an Explorco?
No, I think many different types of people can be a CEO, and I think that's what. So I had earlier in my career, maybe 5, 6 years in, my father had been involved with some environmental conservation initiative, and met Ross Beatty somewhere, and
Nice.
uh, mentioned that I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do in exploration. And he invited me down to his office and had a good, hour-long discussion with him. And it it was a bit eye-opening, realizing, oh, as a geologist, you can run one of these companies. It's a fairly transferable skill set, a lot of critical thinking. And so I don't think you need to have, I think geology just inherently train, and the type of brain that works for geology, it does train you for a lot of this critical thinking. The downside is that a lot of geologists spend a lot of time in the bush, and and it attracts a certain personality type too that might be a little more reclusive and introverted, and that doesn't really work in a CEO role. You need to be fairly extroverted. You need to be able to go out and meet with people, be proactive, but also personable, and you need to have a high enough EQ to understand when to really tone down the technical jargon and basically tailor a discussion to the audience. So that's something that I wouldn't say a geologist background would necessarily prep you for, where the finance world, there's a lot more interaction with other people, a lot more schmoozing and things like that. So you kind of need to bring that to the table if you're going to be a successful geologist CEO. But yeah.
I'm glad you didn't say you need to have a high IQ for a CEO, because that kind of gives me hope that maybe I can be a CEO one day. What I'm getting from you here, though, is that there's no perfect path for a CEO. Like, there's many paths that can lead to a good CEO. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, many different paths, and I think the ultimate component for any success in this industry is kind of perseverance and being, and I'm not talking about personal success, because a lot of people can have personal success where it doesn't actually benefit anybody but themselves. And I'm sure
Yeah.
you're very aware of that within the junior mining sector. I'm talking about success for many people. And like, I guess the one thing that was drummed into me early on was, if you're going to run a company, like, the first thing you got to do is make other people money, and your own success will follow, because you'll have backers in the future. And there's lots of videos and things about, I know Luke has talked about, there's these groups of people that are always successful. It's like, I would say 10% or 190% of the deposits are found by 10% of the people. It's because they've made other people money. They always have access to capital, and they're able to test ideas when other people can't. So I think, yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to go through this, and being just like the hustle, like the drive, and the drive to go find something is really important. And not getting, there's a lot of like setbacks in exploration, and a lot of ways to get upset and down on yourself, and you just need to have a mentality of kind of pushing through all the time. And I don't think there's any education that will train you for that. I think that's a personality thing.
Kind of sounds like marriage. What do you recently spent some time in the bush yourself? Not recently. You do. I mean, you do it consistently. You actually go to projects, and you actually hit the rocks with a hammer. Well, is that a good use of your time as a CEO? Like, is that good ROI? Isn't that work that should be done by the geologists? Or what do you think is the best ROI on the time that you invest in a business as a CEO?
That's a difficult question to ask, because there's, if you need capital, you should be focused on meeting with people, telling the story, and trying to get capital. If you're cashed up, or if you're in the middle of a field season, it would change a little bit. As a lot of finance based, CEOs that have a finance background, and in the Canadian field season with the Canadian asset, they might actually have a lot of free time, because there might not be a lot of value of them being on site. And while you're doing a program, there's only so much you can communicate when you don't have data. So I think there is a benefit of being in the field as a technical person, but you got to balance everything. I can't just go dark all summer. Still need to be available. Starlink has changed that a lot, having easy access to communications. Like, I've done webinars like this from a site before. So you can manage both, but the key thing is, like, we're building companies here that have teams. And if you're a geologist and you're not out there and you are the leader, and you're not out there kind of mentoring people and making sure everything's done correctly and motivating people, I think you're missing something, and your team might not be as motivated if you're not there kind of waving the, leading the way. But it's a balance. So I think there's nuance to it.
Well, no, but that's a good point, because would you say it's a red flag if a CEO never goes to the project? And we're talking from your perspective. So this is early stage exploration stuff. Is it a red flag if the CEO doesn't go to on site, for twice a year or whatever it might be?
Yeah, definitely for early stage. Yeah.
Okay.
If we had a much larger team, there might come a point where I'm still going to go to site at least once a year, though. But I might not be out there, doing 12-hour long traverses through the really horrible bush and doing that. Maybe I'm just doing a quick overview of everything. But you still have to be a part of it. But if you're not a geologist, you should probably still show up, but don't get in people's way. Whereas if you are a geologist and you're experienced, like, you should actually contribute to what's happening on the exploration side, and that includes like your ideas, but it also includes mentoring the geologists and building a team. This is a big component of these companies, is building a team. A lot of companies use consultants to do all their geology, and there is a risk to that. That's not to say there aren't good consultants out there, but the risk is, what happens if you get a new person next year? You don't have that gain knowledge over the project, and it's really expensive retraining people. And if you're operating on really, really tight budgets, it's good to have the people that have kind of really taken the time to understand this project carried over. And part of understanding it includes talking to the more senior leadership, which would be me in Kingfisher's case.
I've been told that it includes motivating your team too in a certain way, and not the motivational thing that you kind of imagine from sports movies or whatever, where the part of it is that too, but like going on site to literally stuff that you'd never talk about in a presentation or a webinar, but literally using the toilet. Like, is the toilet comfortable on site? Like, is the food good? Is the bed warm enough? Like, these things matter to, apparently, I've never been, but apparently they matter to motivate your team to do good enough work. Is that part of your job too? Like keeping people motivated and happy on site?
Yeah, absolutely. And you show up on site for I was there on site, I think I had 8 days in the field this summer. Show up on site and say it's we had good weather, so I can't really say that, but I've definitely showed up where it's been miserable weather. And if you're not going in the field because it's bad weather and coming up with a lot of excuses, it's not ideal. Yeah, I don't, like I said, there's a lot of nuance to this. Certain CEOs probably shouldn't be in the field, and there's a wide range of geologists, from whether you're an expert at planning drill programs, or you're actually a mapper. Like, there's a wide range of different types that could fall into an executive role, and you just got to look at, how can I help the team lead towards a discovery. So it's different for everybody.
What are you? Which of those geologists are you?
I'm I would say a fairly big picture geologist, fairly observant in the field. I'm not a mapper, although I have done that a fair bit in my career. I wouldn't, I don't have the time to go do that for the company, but that wouldn't be the best use of my time. A lot of it is more evaluations. This summer I made sure I got to see every one of our targets that we want to drill next year, just to confirm all the historic information that I've already read. But just to make sure there's no red flags or anything like that, while also making sure the geologists are doing things and making the observations we actually need. So I would say I'm more of a higher level geologist, big picture thinker, but I know lots of other people who I would trust out there mapping. You just mentioned you met my friend Francis in Brussels, Francis McDonald. I would trust him out there mapping. He might not trust himself anymore because it's been a few years, but if he was involved with us, I would want to see him out there maybe doing a little bit of that work. It's so variable, though. Everybody's got a different kind of skill set based on their past experience and where it's put them.
What would you, when you're back home, what would you say is there a typical day in the life, if you will, of a CEO? Because you said some of them have a lot of free time sometimes. So what does your day look like? I mean, you wake up, you open up your laptop. What do you do?
Yeah, so I get on the laptop, go through emails, check in with my team normally, the expiration team. So I'm still very involved with expiration. So whether I've got a video to record or something like that, or a Zoom meeting, uh, work around that. But I spend quite a bit of time talking with our vice president of expiration, Gail Febo, and we spend a lot of time on news releases. When we do a news release, generally it's not like a quick bang out. If we had a ton of news flow, we'd have to shorten that. But you're distilling, say, like this here, distilling what we've done into maybe one or two, or who knows how many news releases. But it's really trying to figure out a way to communicate that, to cover all the bases. Show the opportunity to less technical people, but also put enough technical information out there that there's no red flags, which I often see when reading a news release as a geologist. It's like, oh, they didn't list this information. Is it because it doesn't exist, or why? So yeah, it's a fairly mixed thing. Sometimes I live an hour north of Vancouver in Squamish. Sometimes I'll drive down to meet somebody on the road a fair bit, going to conferences and what have you. So it's highly variable. I wouldn't say every day is a little different.
It's an interesting point that you make about content, so webinars and stuff like that. I want to ask a question about that. Maybe we should actually do an episode on geology red flags within news releases, because I've seen you comment. I know you have your opinions on that too. But what of that, of everything that you just told me here, that a typical day looks like, what of that would you say is the most important part? That's, again, kind of a tough question to answer, because at different times different things are important, as you just told me. What of those things would you say is the most important part for you?
Well, yeah, like again, it changes. Capital raising time is definitely meeting with other people, whether it's in person or on Zoom, and getting the story and getting hopefully commitments for financing out of them. But a lot of the time, it is actually being directly involved with expiration. And we've picked up a bunch of assets over the last couple of years, so there's been a lot of due diligence done on my part, identifying the opportunities and determining whether it's worth proceeding. So I think it just changes based on where you're at in the season. Sometimes it's the capital market side of meeting with other people. Sometimes it's spending 8 hours with my geology team on video calls, basically all day brainstorming. So it's still very involved with geology, but we've also got good people working for us. So I try not to step on their toes too much.
What then is the toughest part? I mean, if you saying what's the most important part, again, kind of a too broad of a question, but what about the toughest part? Would you say, I suppose it's different for different people. That's why I'm asking you specifically, but is it raising capital? Is that the toughest part for you? Or like what? Yeah.
I would say the toughest part, it also goes hand in hand. During the expiration season, is often dealing with the variables you can't control, such as third parties, like service providers. We announced a delay to our ZTEM survey, which is up and running now, and things like that can be pretty frustrating. I'm trying to put my foot on the gas, like, let's get this done, and sending emails or phone calls pretty much every day to a service provider trying to sort it out. So that's, in terms of stress, that can be pretty stressful for me. It wasn't a stress-free summer having that survey delayed. I feel like it reflects negatively upon the company and myself, even though it's out of our control. So things like that, I'll stress out about. But on the capital raising front, obviously it hurts a little bit when you hear somebody that comes up with an excuse not to invest. But then it also motivates you to find a way to either prove they were wrong or convince them in the future. We've been able to raise money. It's been challenging dealing with share price going down. I would say that's, at the end of the day, that's the most stressful thing. But there's difficulties in every part of this process as the CEO running the company, from expiration through to fundraising. So I have a hard time pinpointing the exact most difficult thing, but from a emotional standpoint, I would say seeing your share price go down is pretty stressful, especially if you've got a capital raise on the horizon.
What's the toughest part about being a CEO is being a CEO. I suppose that's what it comes down to. What about the best part? I mean, there's good and bad to every job, I suppose. What's the best part of your job?
Well, kind of being in somewhat control of your destiny. So, if I as a consultant before, I dealt with times where it was other factors were limiting kind of a success of a project potentially, such as fundraising or hustle, or like we didn't get funding for this. So you really get to choose the direction of the company. You've got investors that have entrusted you with their money, and you get to allocate it the way you think is best. And whether that's an arrogant outlook, thinking that you're going to do better than somebody else, it's the whole kind of mindset is you got to prove people wrong, or try to do better than other people you've worked with in the past. So I'm very competitive about this. Other positives are just meeting people. People within the expiration industry are pretty unique, whether they work within it or invest in it. It definitely it attracts a pretty interesting group, as I'm sure you've got to know. There's a lot of people that work within the industry have pretty wild experiences in their lives. If you were to compare them to anybody else, it's a pretty unusual group of people. Often it comes from the mining types being in really weird locations around the world and having crazy experiences, whether it's like riding a camel in Mongolia to work, or I had to swerve out of the way of an executed state prosecutor who was dumped on a road in Mexico. I'm not saying that's a positive, but these things are like eye-opening experiences that you don't experience in many other places. And these types of crazy experiences you have, maybe a close call in a helicopter, they definitely shape people and make them a little different. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, there's a lot of interesting and exciting people, and you get to meet a lot of these people in the industry. So I would say, it's been, I love it.
I like that you're being kind and you're calling them interesting and unusual people. There's other words you could have used. But what is you make a point that you have to trust yourself, and you kind of like almost have to be arrogant to believe, oh, there's a hidden treasure, I'm going to go and find it. Are you doing that with your money too, like trusting you're better than others? And what I mean by that is, do you invest your own personal money only in your own company, or do you also have a portfolio where you're buying other juniors as well?
Yeah, I own some other stocks, but I think all the money I put into juniors this year has gone into my company. I don't think I've made any other investments. Last year I made a few. I don't know I don't actually look at my portfolio that often, but it's got to be at least 50% of it is in Kingfisher. And most of the other investments I have are in private companies, so they're illiquid. So most of my capital is either in that or in my house. So I don't have a lot of flexibility, kind of at the mercy of the market, but also at the mercy of myself, because the goal is obviously to monetize the stock I have in Kingfisher, but that would not be until there's a takeout or something like that. So
how far away would you say that is? Like, or how far away do you hope it is?
Well, this is definitely a forward-looking statement, but we got a ways to go. But that could change pretty quickly with one drill program, or and then a couple follow-up drill programs. So I don't know how quick that is. There's a lot of things out of your control, like the market. Geology is always out of your control, but you can reduce that risk quite a bit through good geology. And I feel like we're in a pretty good place to go out and hopefully make a discovery here in the very near future. So yeah, that's a challenging one to answer, but hopefully soon. I don't know, maybe a couple of years, maybe 5 years, something like that.
That's well, yeah, it's good to kind of have a hope or an outlook. When I started this series, I talked to my mom about it. Like I talked to her about everything basically. And so she was like, oh, you should ask them if they're happy. And I was like, I almost rolled my eyes at her, but I didn't feel like getting a slap. And my mom's Eastern European, so that's definitely in the menu anyways. But so I thought, like, what kind of questions that I cannot ask? That's too broad. But then I thought about it a little bit and thought, like, maybe, are you happy with the choice that you made to go and be a CEO instead of doing what you did before? Because you could have gotten a job somewhere as a geo, and to my knowledge, you're a good geo, so you could have built a good career just being, the VP of exploration, or just chief geo, or whatever it might be, at another company, at a bigger company. So are you happy with that choice? Would you change anything?
No, yeah, really happy with the choice. It fits with kind of my personality of being stubborn and highly motivated and focused on a task, like fixated on a task. And it's helped me in other ways. So I think I've told you, but I had stage 4 melanoma in 2022, so a couple years ago, and I found out in the midst of a financing.
Wow.
They gave me a 50% chance of living until the end of the year. So the diagnosis I had, say 10 years earlier, I think it would have been a 1 in 10 chance of living to the end of the year. But new drugs came along, and I went on immunotherapy during that financing, and came out. I'm fine, and I get tests every 3 months, PET scans, and I've been fine for over 2 years now. Apparently, the drugs work faster on me than they'd ever worked before in British Columbia, and there were only
Nice.
5 drugs, so there was a bit of a bump in the road. But I feel like dealing with all of the, like, getting slammed, having my stock slammed earlier on with Kingfisher, I guess fall 21. I don't think that caused the melanoma. I think but it prepared me for dealing with a lot of these things. And a lot of people would be like, "Oh, your health is way more important than anything." And yeah, it is. But I really care about my company, and kind of getting beaten down from the stock sliding and having a lot of angry investors, and then dealing with that, it kind of prepared me for it. So it didn't really phase me that much, which is surprising, but I would say that actually helped me a lot. And that was a really difficult point in life, and dealing with the kind of the constant getting pounded by the market or whatever in mining, and used to having in the past having exploration ideas not work out, things like that. You kind of get used to just getting knocked down and dusting yourself off and getting up again. And so it did help me. It transferred from my career into my personal life, and I think it prepared me for that. And I'm grateful for that.
I'm sorry to hear you had to go through that at a very young age, but I'm happy you kicked cancer's ass, I suppose. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, and that makes me think about making sacrifices along the way too. I mean, we all have to make them, I suppose. What are kind of the sacrifices that you've had to make along the way between doing that path where, again, you have the degree, you're an educated and a smart geologist, you could have gone and worked for a bigger company, but you chose kind of your own, oftentimes more difficult path. What are the sacrifices you had to make?
Oh, well, one would definitely be as a field geologist, if you're out there, this would be leading up to Kingfisher, but in the past, as a field geo, you definitely give up a lot of a lot on the relationship side of things. So it is pretty difficult to hold down. There's a lot of divorced geologists out there. I'm not divorced. I'm recently engaged, actually, but there's a lot of through my late 20s or so, it's pretty challenging to have a normal relationship when you're away for 150 days straight, basically, in the summertime. And getting Kingfisher up and running, it was doing everything. I was out in the field the first few years all the time. A lot of, working months straight, 12-hour days kind of thing, without, not taking weekends and whatnot. So it definitely affected personal life, but you're also like laser focused on a task. So it's not horrible, but it's definitely a sacrifice you make building these companies. Also financial, if you're putting money into your company and missing other opportunities because you don't have capital available, or you're just working, I think when we started the company, it wasn't taking a salary. So gave up a pretty high paying job to put all my eggs in one basket and kind of survive. But no, it wasn't, it was definitely a lot tighter for a few years. So those are some of the sacrifices. Obviously, like being away a lot is still a sacrifice on a relationship, but you just got to find the right person that will accept that.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on getting engaged. I suppose you found a good one. What do you do get a salary now though, I believe, of Kingfisher. I think last time we chatted, I looked at the management information circular. It might have been for 2022, but how do you look at that? That's part of my questions too, like salary. I believe yours is not by any means egregious. I think it's something like 180 grand or something like that a year, or was in 2022. I don't know how it's going to be this year. But how do you look at salaries as a CEO, and how has that changed between you working as a GO to being a CEO? Basically, I'm asking how much money should a CEO reasonably make?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. It obviously depends on your skill set. You need to look at like how would you be doing elsewhere? What is the cost of you being there? But also what you bring to the table. Like I think somebody that builds a team that has, say, a $10 million company that has full-time IR, has a high paid VPX, because a lot of VPXs will go for that or above now. If you've got all these people around you, maybe you shouldn't be taking that big of a salary if you're only, maybe you're not working that much. I believe that the geologists out there who are doing this, and they're working, I'm not to say that the other people aren't working as hard, but they're geologist is being a high level geologist is a pretty you can make pretty good money as a consultant these days. So it's added value for a company basically, because you're doing everything else plus that of it. So in terms of how to get paid, it should probably be tied to size of the company and success of the company. But there's also a kind of base level just to get by. It's not cheap in BC these days. It's the cost of living is pretty damn high around here, especially with housing.
Yep. Yeah, so I've heard. It's also like that's part of the incentive. We have to be real about that. You don't go to a job only because you love it. I think most people don't. Money is part of the incentive. Like you have to be well incentivized, and part of it is your options, and part of it is your shares. But you also have to be, excited about making ends meet. So that's part of it too. Have you had moments where you weren't as excited? And I suppose I'm being kind when I asked if you've had time. I think we all have them, but moments where you kind of felt like I'm done. You were fed up with everything, and you said to yourself, "Okay, that's it. No more CEO roles. I'm done. I gotta leave this."
No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. No, I don't know. Like explorers are kind of like there's unlimited hope. You need to kind of harness that and not give a specific, say, drill target unlimited hope. And you need to be cognizant of when to kill something basically. But in general, like you have to be super optimistic to survive in this industry. And I am, and a lot of my friends in the industry are, and I would say that's one of I talked about the interesting personalities. That is one of the big key components of what that I love about people in this industry is a lot of people are really optimistic, and they're used to getting screwed, whether it's on investments or the market crashes and like mining stocks are just on gold's going way up and mining stocks aren't. They're just used to getting beaten down but remaining optimistic. And if they're not, they might not be the right person for this industry, whether it's from an investment standpoint or their own personal mental health.
Unlimited hope. That's kind of the story of my portfolio over the last couple of years, I believe, and that's been the case for a lot of us. But a lot of the times when you might feel fed up is when you're kind of out of your depth, if you will. And again, talking about myself a little bit here, but I feel out of my depth on a daily basis in this space. For me specifically, from a geology perspective, when I do company interviews, I spend most of my time, and I typically prepare. It's getting better now, but it's 6 to 8 hours is what I spend typically on preparing for an interview. Most of that, like 80% of that, is easily geology because I don't understand most of these things. And so obviously the geology is not the case for you, but do you ever feel out of your depth? Like, do you ever feel like, oh, I have so much more to learn, or like where you have to lean on someone to kind of figure something out?
Yeah, often. and it would be on the capital markets side of things. I would say I've learned pretty quickly, but there's always room to grow. But also on the geology side, I think the last 3 nights at home, I've been reading technical like papers from the Society of Economic Geologists on a different deposit to try to wrap my head around what we're seeing on the project. So you always have to be trying to improve yourself and learning. And I've told this to my own geologists, like you can't expect to show up to work and do everything within the 12-hour day. Sometimes you need to go home and do your homework, just from a personal development standpoint. So I think, yeah, there's definitely times where I feel kind of out of my area of expertise, and all you can really do is try to improve upon that.
Well, I asked you, we didn't really talk too much about your early career, and I asked you whether you do something different for your studies. What about your early career? Talk to me a little bit about what that looked like and whether you would do something different for your early career to maybe not have those, oh, I feel out of my depth moments that you might have now.
Yeah, so the first few years, like I had summer jobs, and then I worked for a really good geologist, Dave Moore, who ran Serengeti Resources, which has the Quinica project, which is now in Northwest Copper. So I worked there for about 2.5 years. Then I worked at Imperial Metals for the same period of time. Then I actually started my own consultancy where me and some people we staked a project, put a conceptual project, put it into a junior, and I kind of had a handshake agreement to run the work there, and built up a consultancy where I met our VPX, Gail Febo, and we worked together for I think 3 or 4 years there. And then that evolved to the point where I didn't want to evolve it anymore, and I wanted to go start a company and started Kingfisher. So like along that road, there were some really good mentors. It wouldn't have hurted to have been in a major with maybe a bit more mentorship. I know a lot of my friends. I've always had a lot of respect for people who came out of the Newmont program. I know some really good geos who did that, but everything works out and puts you in your path for a reason. Or maybe I'm not one of those people that thinks everything happens for a reason, but it does kind of like, there's different things you're going to pick up that somebody working at a major aren't going to pick up. One of them is the actual exploration reality of how a few of these projects work out. And then also you get a bit more exposure to the capital markets side of the story when you're working at juniors versus work. You're more vulnerable. If the market is tanking, you're like, geez, I got to buckle down here at work. I might get laid off. That's not really the case at a major to that extent. You got more job security, and you're less involved with the financial aspect of these companies or the promotional aspect. You're not writing news releases on a drill target if you're working for a major, but you are doing that if you're working for a junior, or at least you're involved to maybe you're drafting the maps for it. So it gives you a pretty well-rounded experience, but there's also benefits to the major side of the equation. I considered doing an MBA, and then talked to enough senior people that said, look, you know enough people. That's one of the main benefits of an MBA, is increasing your Rolodex. And they said the opportunity cost of taking a year or two off is going to be pretty high. You may as well just sink or swim and get on with it. So no, I don't really regret anything. I think I'd do everything the same way. Maybe I would pick a different company. So when I was graduating at UBC, I came up with a short list of companies I wanted to work for. And it was based on a few factors. One, having a really good mentor there, having an exciting project that is either a discovery with potential for more discoveries, or something looking like it might be a discovery. And then the third component was maybe I'll get a few stock options and it will, help me with a down payment or something like that if it works out. I created a short list and I ran it through a kind of a friend of a friend, a senior ex Kamenko VPX, and he agreed with all the ones I said, and I couldn't decide, so I went and worked for Dave Moore at Serengeti. Dave's a great geologist, and I learned a ton there. But the other company I'd shortlisted was Richfield Ventures, that when made the Blackwater discovery. And I know a few fellow classmates from UBC who kind of just did the shotgun approach and applied everywhere and didn't have that same kind of early industry knowledge, or they didn't have the same mindset of where could I maybe make some money, and they went there and they got a big enough win that they were able to I think a few of them paid with cash potentially for an apartment in Vancouver back in a cheaper real estate market that's probably worth
Okay.
$1 million. So, like that wasn't the best move in that regard, but I also got great porphyry experience, and that's what I'm doing now. So
You should get a chest tattoo that says "no regrets" and spell it with an A instead of an E.
That's actually what came to my mind is that as well.
Good.
No,
No regrets, or no regrets. But what did no regrets even in terms of putting this land package there? Because you're talking about, I mean, you shared some pretty good pictures of your recent site visit on your own Twitter profile. By the way, for people listening, that's DPGO, so DPGEO. Dustin puts out some good content, not specifically Kingfisher related, although you try, but not always is it Kingfisher related. It's a lot of educational stuff, so good for you on that. But so and I saw you mentioning a lot of the porphyry centers that you'd visited, and I thought about the land package that you have right now. If you could go back to the time where you kind of put it together, got your hands on it, is there something you would do differently, or would you still just go for this same land package the way it is right now?
yeah, I would.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I think we're in one of the places to be in British Columbia. I think the Golden Triangle is if you're going to find a really large system, which is generally what it takes to make a mine these days in the porphyry world, uh, like a big system, a 1 billion ton type system, the Golden Triangle is the place in BC. Yeah, there's areas with cheaper access, but the majors want scale, and there's a reason there's been a lot of M&A in the region with Newmont coming into the Golden Triangle in a big way. So I think it's a great place to be. There's plenty of other good places around the world too, though. So, but this happens to be the sweet spot for us because between Gail and I and our tech advisory team, we have a lot of experience in this area. So it's kind of focus on what you're good at.
That's a good point. And also your backyard, as you mentioned. A lot of what we've talked about here so far, Dustin, has been looking back, I guess, and then maybe we could look a little bit forward here in the conversation. But if we're talking again in a couple of years, let's say 10 years from now, again, I hope we'll talk before 10 years, but what would you like to see if you look back then? Like, 10 years up in the future, you look back at the last decade of your life, what would you like to see in there for you to consider it a success?
Well, before I get to success, I'd like to be looking down at the commodity prices back in 2024 from way up on top of them. So that would be a nice thing. But for success, like we want to go out and make a discovery here. And I feel, as long as we have access to capital, I think we can pull that off. So what would make Kingfisher a success would be to go out and find metal in the ground, hopefully in an economic resource, create shareholder value, and do a deal where we can create an exit for everybody, and then hopefully be on something else by then. So yeah, there's a lot of ways you can look at that, but obviously we want to find something and sell a company. That's the obvious goal here. We're not going to build a porphyry mine. We're not going to build any mine. We're trying to create a land package that is going to be very attractive to a major mining company, and show enough potential on it, whether it be through a resource or excellent drill intercepts. The goal is just to show that we're sitting on some incredible ground in a very workable part of the planet, and hopefully benefit all our shareholders while doing that.
I suppose everyone kind of hopes for an emotional exit, if you will. But is that the right thing to be hoping for or working towards? So this might be more of a philosophical question here for you, but does it you want to sell the company? I mean, that's what you for a substantial price that you would make everyone or almost everyone involved in it money. And that's a good goal to have when you're the CEO of a public company, because that's your task, to make people money, basically. But does it have to be a mine or have the potential to be a mine. What I mean by that is, what if we go even further? What if you go 30 years up in the future and you look back at the last 30 years and you're like, okay, it took me 5, 6, 7, 10 years to sell it. I sold it, but it's been 20 years. And the thing that I discovered is not yet a mine. Like, would that matter to you? Does it have to be a mine by then?
Yeah, so that's where I kind of separate my personal goals from the company's goals. You know, my goal with Kingfisher is to make people money and doing it in a you know, an ethical fashion where I'm, you know, respecting all the stakeholders involved, uh, and creating something that could turn into a mine. That's separate. You know, people can make plenty of money. I know, for example, GT Gold made people a lot of money. That who knows if it's going to become a mine or not? We don't know. We'll have to wait. But it was still a great exit. I think they sold it for 480 million or so. So that type of exit, I would be happy with in terms of respecting my shareholders and you know, satisfying them and completing that task. From a personal level, though, I want to actually, I would love to find a mine that creates a big economic impact for, say, the Tahltan people in Northwest BC, but also the province of BC. And when at the end of the day, when you die, like, money doesn't matter. It's more your legacy. And it would be nice. It would be nice to have, you know, a mine that goes for 50 years with 1,000 jobs. That'd be great. That would benefit more. You know, that would benefit potential kids, their kids, and everybody else in the province. And you know, I love BC. A lot of issues in Canada these days, but I'm still a BC boy, and I would like to leave something behind. But you know, that's kind of independent. It's related because it means that people probably had a good win, but it's not necessary to benefit shareholders. But it's a hope for me.
Yeah, if you could have both, the best of both worlds, that would be fine. You know, benefiting that would be great. I mean, you know, benefiting shareholders as well as finding a mine. Um, yeah, that's a good point. You mentioned the problems in BC. There's problems everywhere, I guess. What would you say is the biggest problem with our space right now? And that's a huge question. We can talk 3 hours about that alone. But what's the thing that bugs you the most, I suppose?
Yeah, so I would say, and you've heard it countless times, is there's too many companies. You know, say, I don't know, 1 in 5 or less is a decent company. And they're pulling capital away from the people that actually know what they're doing. And a lot of the time, the capital is being pulled by pretty nefarious people. And the problem I have with this is that I see drill targets being touted all the time that they're bogus. Like, it doesn't make any sense, and people are getting all hyped up. You see it on Twitter all the time. People are getting hyped up, and you know it's going to fail. And sure enough, it does. And a lot of these people, you know, they've put a lot of money into these companies, and they might not be a resource investor again. So and I think that's actually what's happened over time, is the capital pool is kind of concentrated to less people because so many retail investors have been, for lack of better words, like, used and abused. And so that's an issue. It's and I've tried to do some work on that in a nuanced manner without, you know, naming anybody, but just talking about, like, some geological principles that you need to look for. But it's a challenging thing to do. So yeah, that's an issue. These companies are pulling capital away from the groups that actually stand a chance. That's why sometimes I would say the private company model might actually be better. Because if you can find that pool of capital, just stick with it. And if they're going to, because the problem is, like, there's a long time for exploration. It doesn't just happen over one program. Often you need 5 years. And a lot of these investments, people think of them as a trade or a seasonal thing, but the companies really need capital over a longer period of time to effectively, you know, deploy an exploration strategy. So a lot of these things are broken. I think there's whether money came out of, like, what Kobold did with Silicon Valley money, and I don't know about the way they've done it, but, like, that's an idea, is to go get a ton of ground and screen it with a good backer, and just use science, because ultimately, like, exploration is science. And the problem is when the science gets diluted and the promotion gets too much. It fools a lot of people, but the odds of success are so low, and it can burn those people, and then they won't invest in the real stories. So, market inefficiencies, those would be my issues.
Those are the only ones. I mean, simple. No, it's that is a big part of that's a huge part of what we do here. So, and again, those geo red flags that I wrote down, we should definitely do an episode on that and kind of a guidelines to reading news releases or whatever it might be. So that's going to come up in the future. We've been at this for almost an hour. I don't want to keep you all day, but I have a lightning round, which I didn't tell you about because I wanted you to think off the bat. But I'll basically ask you 10 multiple choice questions and you have 10 seconds for each. Are you ready for that?
Yep.
Let's go. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Mountains or beach?
Oh, sea.
That's tricky.
That's number C, both.
Well, I suppose in Vancouver you have both, right? So, football or hockey?
Hockey.
Okay. When I say football, what's the thing you think about? You think of real football or you think of rugby?
Both. Well, not rugby. I'm thinking of soccer or American football or CFL.
Don't call it soccer. Just call it real football.
Okay.
Books or movies?
Books.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
Beer or wine?
Wine. That's because I'm celiac, but I do like beer. But wine's more expensive.
Fair point. From geos, I typically expect to hear beer anyway. So, adventure travel or luxury resort?
Adventure for sure.
Steak or burger?
Steak.
Dogs or cats? I think your profile picture actually answers that, but I'll ask you anyways.
Yep, dog.
Geochem or geophysics?
Geochem, 100%.
How come?
It's real data. It's empirical. There's always an element of geofantasy to geophysics. Well, there's inversions done, so it can extrapolate a little bit, whereas geochem is just a number. That being said, both are really, really useful, and for certain deposits, certain techniques are like magnetics and IP are very well proven for porphyry deposits, but for certain other things, they're a little bit of like, ooh.
But in BC specifically, you're dealing with glaciation and stuff like that. It could be noise, contamination, transported. I mean, geochem could also be challenging, right?
Yeah, but drill holes are geochem, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Fair. Yeah, sure. I was actually
a nice geochem anomaly with a nice geophysical anomaly.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I ask you geochem or geophysics, and then you say both at the same time on top of each other. I get that. I suppose lastly, and you've answered.
But geology would go number one. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. And you've answered the last question here kind of with your feet, but I typically ask Toronto or Vancouver. If I gave you the ability, like you have to settle in one place forever, and the way things are going right now, I mean, with everything in calculated, like real estate prices and economies and politics and everything, what do you pick, Toronto or Vancouver?
Vancouver.
Got it. Well, that's it. I'm all out of questions. What am I forgetting to ask you? What do you think I and the world should know about Dustin that we don't know yet?
Okay, so the one thing I find very surprising is there's if you've got a question, don't just postulate on a forum. Reach out to me and actually ask me. Often I'll make myself available, and it's highly variable when you get investor inbound. But just reach out to me. As simple as that. And you can find me on Twitter or our emails in our presentation, and then I'll give you my phone number. I try to limit the amount of spam call coming in, which is a lot of service providers sending me phone calls. But if you need to get a hold of me, happy to make time for you. And I say it over and over again, but yeah, just get it straight from the horse's mouth.
Well, I'll put up your email address and your Twitter handle on screen right now for people that want to see it. And again, it's DPGO, so DPGEO on Twitter for people who want to reach out. And people should follow you. You do some good work on there. So thank you so much for sitting down with me, Dustin, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Antonio.